Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are around the world. This is another Open Learning Campus webinar. This series is on PPP identification and screening. Today's webinar is on Virginia PPP, and with me today I have Morteza Farjan. He is from the Virginia Public-Private Partnerships. And then also, next to him, we have Patrick DeCorla Souza, and he is from the Federal Highways Administration P3 program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Morteza to start his presentation off.
Thank you, Rob, and good morning, everyone. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the experience that Virginia has in regard to P3 program that was established in Virginia a couple of years ago, and specifically talk a little bit about how we look at projects, screen them, and decide which delivery model we should choose for that particular project. As Rob said, I'm a program manager with Virginia's P3 office. I've been with this office for a little bit over 5 years now, and I've worked on multiple projects, so I'll be happy to at least share our experience on one of those projects as a case study at the end of the presentation. First thing that we are asked a lot in conferences or in meetings that we go through is that, what is a good public-private partnership project or a P3 project? Sometimes it's hard to answer that question, but I'll try to explain a little bit today that how we at least look at our projects and decide whether a project is a good fit for a P3 delivery model or not. First, we need to ask the right questions. There are different questions that we can ask. What is a good project? What is the best delivery model for that project? And what is the best risk allocation for that project? So there are differences that we need to be aware of. Sometimes people don't distinguish between that question of what is a good project and what is the best delivery model for that project. But in Virginia, we usually go through a process that is called SMART scale to look at all the projects that different localities want to do in the state, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and rank them. Usually we use a benefit cost analysis type of thing that allows us to rank those projects against each other and then select the top priority projects, the projects that score higher than the other projects. So that's how we know that which projects we want to implement or deliver in the future. Then the next question is, how do we want to deliver those projects? What is the best procurement model, delivery model, financing option for those projects? And that's when we start looking at different financing options or delivery models and try to look at different risk allocations and try to come up with the best structure for that particular project. We need to look at project goals and objectives. That is mainly related to the first question, that what is a good project or what is not a good project. A project that delivers those goals and objectives that are top priority for the Commonwealth. Usually they score higher, for example, congestion relief, improving safety, improving travel times. There are also some policy goals and objectives. For example, a policy goal might be having a project built without any tolls, or having a project built with minimum tolls, or having a project built with the ability for the state to develop parallel projects in the future. So there are different policy goals and objectives that we need to go through them and understand what the administration wants to do, what the localities want to do, and how we should structure the deal in a way that it delivers those policy goals and objectives. This is a slide I want to show you that I'm sure that you are all familiar with public-private partnerships. You know that there are different ways that we can structure a P3 project. It can start from something as simple as just maybe a design build with some operation and maintenance, and go all the way to a full concession. So that's what you see, design, build, operation, maintenance in the middle of that range that I'm showing you in this slide. To the right, they're mainly called P3. To the left, they're mainly called traditional delivery models that as you go to the left, public responsibility increases. As you go to the right, private responsibility increases. And you see that there are different ways that the project, commercial structure for the project can be designed. It can be just design, build, finance, design, build, operate, maintain, design, build, finance by public sector, design, build, finance by private sector. Revenue risk is transferred to private sector, or revenue risk is retained by public sector. We just have availability payment. So there are different ways that we can look at it, and there are different financial structures that we can look at it. At least in the U.S., we have public contribution. That's basically the money that the sponsor is putting in the project to make it financially feasible. Usually, capital market debt is where you can go to issue bonds. We have private activity bonds in the U.S., for example, that are tax exempt, very popular type of financing. Private equity, you can have infrastructure funds, bank debt. So there are many instruments that are out there that will look at them and see which one of them gives us the best financial model. Now let's talk a little bit about is P3 the right delivery model for a particular project? Let's assume that we have a project that has gone through that small scale process that I mentioned a little bit earlier and has scored relatively high. So the state has decided to go ahead and put that project out there for project development and procurement in the future. So we know that we want to build this project. Now the question is how should we procure it? What delivery model we should use? So this is the process that we usually go through in P3 office. And I know that it's a little bit hard to see this graph, but I just wanted to tell you that there are multiple steps that we go through even before we get to the procurement stage. And basically this slide shows you all those steps that we go through. So let's talk a little bit in more detail about the steps that we go through. Based on the legislation that we have in Virginia, we accept unsolicited proposals. Those are proposals that are submitted to us by private sector. We look at them. We usually go through a policy review, and we have a recommendation to the responsible public entity, which, for example, in the case of transportation projects, highway projects, usually is Virginia Department of Transportation. Similar to that, if there is a solicited proposal, it's basically these are ideas that come from that smart scale prioritization that I just mentioned about, or from our localities. We'll look at them. At very high level, we want to look at 4 or 5 or 6 questions that are important to us. Whether this project is a suitable project for P3, does it have support at political level? Does it have support at local level? Is it a project that qualifies under the Public-Private Transportation Act that we have? Does it have enough complexity for private sector to come in and bring innovations and value to the project or not? So those are the type of questions that we ask ourselves. And if at very high level, subjective level, we see that yes, they pass all of those criteria, we go to the next level, which is basically we look at it at a more detailed level. Now we develop some high level cost estimates, some high level financial analysis, and we try to see whether the numbers add up or not. So at the end of this step, we go back to the responsible public entity. We share the results with them, and also we share the results with a legislative body that is called the Oversight Board, which in case of Virginia, that is Commonwealth Transportation Board, or we have another entity that's called PPTA Advisory Committee. So we go back to these entities, we present the results to them, and we tell them that based on our analysis, it looks like that this project has the potential to become a P3 project. If they agree with us, that's when we start spending a little bit more money. So all the way up to here, the goal is to screen projects at very high levels so that those projects that we know with very limited time that we spend on them, that they're not good P3 projects, we put them aside. Everything is done in-house. The goal is to not waste our resources on the projects that they don't have a chance to become a P3 project in the future. We all know that resources are limited, so we want to put them on the projects that have a high potential to be delivered as P3. If the project passes this step, we go to the next step, which is project development. This is when we usually bring consultants on board. And when we do a little bit of design, we do a little bit of a more detailed cost estimate, risk workshop, risk analysis, and a little bit of traffic and revenue study, more detailed financial analysis. And at this stage, we also do our initial value for money analysis, which is basically we look at all different options that are available to us, all the options that I mentioned earlier. How would it look like if you want to publicly finance the project? How would it look like if you want to privately finance the project? What are different options that you have to publicly finance the project, off balance sheet, on balance sheet for the state? So those are the type of conversations that usually happens at that stage. We present all the results to the head of the agency and to the to the oversight board, and also to our advisory committee. Head of the agency at the end of this step usually needs to make a decision, which we call it finding of public interest, that based on all the information that he has received, whether he believes that pursuing and initiating a P3 procurement delivers the best value to the citizens of Commonwealth or not. Is it in the interest of a state to initiate a P3 procurement or not? And if he makes that decision, and if the oversight board and the advisory committee concur with his decision, everything is documented, and then we start our procurement. Our goal is to not start a procurement unless we have everybody on the same page, unless we know that our legislative branch is on board with the project as well. The localities are on board with the project, because starting a procurement puts our reputation at risk, and we want to make sure that when we go out there to the market knows that we have done our due diligence, everything is ready to go, and we can deliver. And we have a good reputation for that. Projects that we usually put out there for procurement, we are able to deliver them. And that helps a lot with attracting investors to come to our state and invest in our projects. If procurement starts, pretty much everything is straightforward after that. We go through the procurement, we get the proposals, we review them, and after we select the best value proposal, we do our final value for money analysis, in which we go back and check whether the proposal that we have got still delivers the best value for us compared to all other options that were on the table. And usually we keep other options on the table, especially public finance option, until we have a deal and until we know that the deal is signed and everything is good to go. Because we want to make sure that we have plan B just in case P3 procurement cannot deliver the value that we expected. If everything is good, again, we go to our oversight board, to the advisory committee, everybody signs off on the project. At that stage, the head of responsible public entity makes another finding of public interest, and after that we can sign the contract and basically go to commercial close, and then there would be a period of time that we need to work with the team that we have selected to go to financial close. Just give you an idea on what type of questions or what type of important elements we'll look at in our high-level project screening and in our detail-level project screening. Those are the type of questions that we ask ourselves. Like what I mentioned, on the high level, it's more subjective. When you go to the detail level, we look at the risks, we look at the numbers, and we try to do more quantitative type of analysis. Our value for money analysis is very simple. You can go to our website, look at our guidelines. Basically, what we try to do is we're trying to create a scenario in which we can compare all the viable options. And we don't try to make it complicated. We try to keep it as simple as possible. Our goal is not to be able to reach a conclusion at the end that whether one delivery model is better than the other delivery model. Our goal is to show the trade-offs to our decision makers, that what each delivery model can do for them. If they pick that delivery model, how things will look like at the end of the day, so that they can make a decision based on their policy goals and objectives and based on the trade-offs that we show them which one of those delivery methods they want to pick. And the answer could be different depending on what policy goals and objectives we have. For example, an administration may want to transfer traffic risk for whatever reason. Another administration may want to retain it. After we tell them that what is the value of transferring or retaining traffic risk, they can make that decision that whether it's in the interest of public to transfer it or retain it for that particular project. So let's talk a little bit about a case study that I put together. The project is called I-66, Interstate 66. It's on the western side of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. It starts from Interstate 495, and it goes 25 miles to the east to U.S. Route 15 in Prince William County. I started working on this project about 4 years ago. We started our environmental study back at the Tier 1 environmental study actually started in 2011. At that time, we started a Tier 2 environmental study when we knew that what you see in this slide is more or less the scope of our project. Currently, the road has 4 lanes in each direction. 1 lane is high occupancy for high occupancy vehicles. Vehicles with 2 or more passengers can use it. The other 3 lanes, any vehicle can use it. So what we are proposing to do is take that high occupancy vehicle, build another lane right next to it, and have 2 lanes in each direction as managed lane, or express lanes as we call them. High occupancy vehicles can use it for free. Buses can use it for free. Vehicles with less than 3 passengers need to pay a toll, and the toll rate is dynamic. It changes every 15 minutes, and the goal is to make sure that we maintain a speed of 55 miles per hour, at least 55 miles per hour in those lanes. So when there are more cars in those lanes, toll rates goes up, so that some cars will decide to leave. And when there are not many vehicles on those lanes, the toll rates will go down to encourage more people to use it. And we are preserving median for future metro extension. You can see the timeline of the activities that we went through. You can see that started in 2011, and we just posted our draft RFP in December of 2015. So almost 4 years of pre-procurement activities, going through all those steps that I mentioned earlier. But what is interesting, and I want to talk to you a little bit about, is after we went through project development, we were able to analyze the project and come up with some numbers. And these are the numbers that you see we had at that time. Based on the scope of project that we had at that time, and based on the numbers that we had developed in-house, we were expecting to need about $900 to $1 billion of public funds to make the project financially feasible. Of course, everything was high level. There was some contingency involved in the project at that stage. The scope was not finalized, but that was the best number we had at that time. We looked at some public finance options, and we figured out that with probably $400 to $600 million, we can make that happen. And if we do public finance over time, we're going to get about $200 to $500 million of revenue back. These are the excess revenues that over time will come back to the Commonwealth. So we decided to create a benchmark for private sector and ask private sector whether they can beat that benchmark or not, because we knew how we could deliver the project on our own. And there are different options that, by the way, we considered, and none of those options was adding debt to our debt capacity. Pretty much all of them on the public finance option, they were off balance sheet for the state. We were taking some revenue risk, but we knew that we would not have that problem with our debt capacity. So we created a term sheet. We told private companies that we want to get indicative prices from them for 3 different delivery models. Design build with some alternative technical concepts. Design build, operate, and maintain. So under those 2 options, we would publicly finance the project, but we will have a contract with private sector to either design and build the project, and then operation and maintenance would be by the state, or design, build, and operate and maintain it for a period of time. Again, financed by the state, but they take responsibility for operation and maintenance. The third avenue, of course, was a full toll concession. We went out to the market. First, we asked everybody to submit their qualifications to us. We shortlisted teams. There were basically 5 teams that were formed. All 5 of them wanted to submit under Design Build ATC and Design Build Operate Maintain. Only 3 of them wanted to submit under Design Build Finance Operate Maintain. So 2 teams, they told us that they would not participate in a toll concession procurement. We got their indicated prices at that time. We looked at the prices. We looked at our financing models. And we decided to pick the DBFOM model at that stage because based on the numbers that we saw and based on the feedback that we got from industry, we figured out that it's probably in our interest to move forward with that toll concession model because it looked like the private sector had a lot of appetite to take that revenue risk. We created a term sheet. These are the terms that we put in front of them. We told them that you have told us that you can deliver this project with these terms based on the numbers that you have given us. These are basically cast in the stone. We are not going to change them. And we are going to develop our contract documents based on these terms. You will see that one of the things that they're supposed to give us is $350 million net present value for future corridor improvements. That is basically an approximate number for the $200 to $500 million number that I mentioned earlier under public finance option they would have got over time in net present value. So we're trying to create an apple versus apple type of comparison between P3 model, toll concession model, and public finance options. We also told them that they need to pay for our transit scope. You see that these are the numbers we got from them back in December. And the reason that they selected toll concession is after putting that term sheet in front of them, giving them all the information on their toll concession, they told us that the teams gave us different numbers, but the range was anywhere between $600 million of public funds to us getting a check for almost $150 million. So that was actually pretty interesting for us. That was a good deal. It looks like that concession model delivers the best value for us. Among all those numbers, they have the lowest public contribution numbers. So the decision was made, we started the procurement, and we selected a team this November after we got the proposals. And it appeared that the decision we made was actually a good decision because that $150 million check to us actually became $500 million check to us after we went through that process. Because as we went through the process, as we looked at the ATCs, alternative technical concepts, innovative financial concepts, we were able to make the deal better and better and better. But I should mention that our term sheet, those terms that we put in front of the at the beginning, that the term of contract is 50 years and a whole bunch of other limitations that they had, none of those changed. So we didn't really make any concession on those things that were important for us. So the deal was really good deal. And here you can see a comparison of the previous deals that we have had and the Transform 66 deal that I just mentioned. You can see that how over time we have been able to work on our program, make the program more competitive, more transparent in terms of risk allocation, work with private sector, bring alternative technical concepts, innovative financial concepts, and be able to negotiate a deal that delivers a better value for the Commonwealth. So some of these deals are actually comparable to I-66, but you can clearly see that the value that competition brought to I-66 project. 95 and 495, for example, those are managed lanes in the same region, but they were not competitively procured the way that Transform 66 was competitively procured. So with that, I will stop and I will give it back to Rob and Patrick, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Morteza, for a great presentation. I'm going to pass it over now to Patrick to give a presentation as well.
Thanks, Rob. So my name is Patrick DeCorla Souza. I'm with the U.S. Department of Transportation's Build America Bureau. It's a new bureau that has been established in July of this year to help with financing and funding of major projects, major transportation projects in the United States. Let's see, is that? Oh, done. Yeah, all right. So what I'm going to talk about is our P3 toolkit that we developed because We don't directly build transportation projects. We assist states and local governments in financing and funding of transportation projects. So our role is mainly in a technical assistance role. We provide all kinds of resources to state and local governments to help them understand public-private partnerships and to do analyses that might be needed to conduct different types of evaluation for public-private partnerships. So on the left-hand side, you see we've got a bunch of fact sheets. These are two-page descriptions of various P3 concepts, primers, which are a little longer and oriented mainly to managers. And then we've got guides which are oriented towards the professionals who are doing the analyses. On the right-hand side, you see the tools we have available, and these are all on our website. P3 Screen helps the agencies do qualitative analysis, so simply evaluate potential projects based on project characteristics, agency characteristics, and the market characteristics, the kinds of things Morteza already explained. And then we have a tool that can be used for quantitative assessment, which we call P3 Value, and this is version 2.0 now that helps agencies at a screening level develop values for risk, financial viability relative to doing the project with a P3, value for money analysis, and also now social welfare analysis. So this is a brief flow diagram that explains how the tool works. In the center, you've got all the various inputs. On the left-hand side, you have the process used for value for money analysis. On the right-hand side, you have the process used for benefit cost analysis, which gives you the estimates of public welfare. So I won't go through each input, but those are, of course, inputs that you normally have in value for money analysis. What's new in benefit cost analysis or social welfare analysis is the need to estimate not just the public agency financial benefits or impacts on the agency's budget, but now we attempt to estimate the impacts on users. So these are social benefits that accrue to users as a result of either doing the project earlier, which is usually the case. In the case of a P3 in the United States, states usually are able to do projects sooner if they do it with a P3 simply because of funding constraints and debt capacity constraints that they have. And secondly, the effects of P3s related to quality differences that you might get. Again, these could relate to better quality of service under a P3, maybe because of better maintenance of the facility and that type of thing, better response to emergency incidents, things of that type. In this graph, what I'm trying to show is some of the types of information you get out of the tool. In the center, you see what the delayed conventional delivery. So if a state does a project in a traditional way, usually they have to wait for funding to come into their budget over a longer period of time, and the project may get delayed or it may be constructed a lot more slowly over a number of years. And what you see in the center is the value is, in this case, in this hypothetical example, $344 million. That is the revenues exceed the present value of revenues exceed the present value of cost by 344 million, which means the state has a surplus of $344 million. Now, if they are able to accelerate the project somehow by eliminating budgetary constraints, they can get a surplus in their budget worth a present value of $432 million. And if they do it as a P3, on the other hand, their surplus is reduced to only $418 million. So the traditional financial analysis that is normally done on a financial basis, which is, of course, value for money analysis, would give you the answer that says, it's better to do a project somehow trying to accelerate it with conventional delivery. So the question is, what about other benefits that are not considered by value for money analysis, specifically user benefits, perhaps because in the case of a P3 delivery, the concessionaire can complete construction sooner, and therefore benefits can start accruing sooner, or the quality of the project is better and provides better quality of service. So what you see in this graph here, and these are the types of results you get from P3 value, accelerated conventional delivery has an excess of benefits over cost of $254 million. However, in P3 delivery, because of earlier delivery of the project or better quality of service, the excess of benefits over cost is $290 million. So in other words, the benefits are roughly about $36 million more in the case of P3 delivery, and then you could take that value and trade it off against any excess in costs or lower surplus to the agency in the case of the financial analysis. So we are trying in this case to provide a more holistic, comprehensive evaluation where we consider not just the benefits to the agency in terms of their budget, but also to society at large. So the tools and the resources are available at on our website, in particular the Federal Highway Administration website, where I work part-time, so I represent both the Build America Bureau and the Federal Highway Administration. So you can go to that URL, the second one on the list, and of course we also have a website for the Build America Bureau and an institution called the Build America Transportation Investment Center Institute, which is the educational arm of the US DOT. So it provides training, webinars, etc., and you can find a variety of webinars on that BATIC Institute website. And right at the end, I've provided my email address in case you would like to contact me and have any further questions. Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you very much, Patrick. As Patrick said and Morteza said, all of this information that has been presented today, all the tools are available on several public websites in the U.S., so all the audience would be able to go online and be able to obtain the guidance tools and all the other guidance from Virginia, and then as well as the tools from the Federal Public Highways Administration. And those links have been presented in both of the presentations that you'll have access to shortly. Right now we're starting our polling questions. So if you take some time to answer the polling question, the first one is, when is the best time to conduct value for money analysis? So if you just take a minute or two to go ahead and answer those questions, and then we'll go ahead and we'll react to your reaction, just shortly. Okay, so the polling for this first question has ended. So far, it seems like the vast majority of people, 9 out of 10, have said project initiation and project screening phase would be the best time to conduct value for money analysis. About 9 to 10% say project development phase, and no one has said project procurement phase. So what is your reaction to that, Morteza?
What I mentioned earlier, value for money analysis is really a process. It can be done in different stages of project delivery, and at each stage it has a different objective. So usually in project initiation and screening phase, it's really hard to do value for money analysis that is meaningful, because at that stage there are a lot of assumptions around even the scope of project, about the revenue, about the cost. So we need to make a lot of high-level assumptions that makes any type of analysis really difficult. But the subjective part of value for money analysis can be done in that stage. In my experience, the best phase is project development for initial value for money analysis, because that is where you have a little bit more information about your scope. You have done some level of design, you have some level of traffic and revenue analysis. You can do a little bit more sophisticated type of financial analysis, so the results are more meaningful. We have a lot of assumptions in value for money analysis, and if we cannot use good assumptions, the results that we get at the end wouldn't be accurate enough for us to make any conclusions. So I would say project development, in my experience, is time that we have enough information for quantitative type of value for money analysis. Qualitative part of it can start in project screening, but all the way at the end of procurement phase, I think it's important to go back and look at our value for money analysis, update it, and make sure that the results that we have got at the end of this process is consistent with the assumptions that we started with at the beginning. Because I have seen deals that when they go through this process, the output is completely different than what was analyzed in value for money analysis. So we want to make sure that what we are getting at the end of the day still gives us the best value.
And I think that's a good point. And as we move on to the next polling question, just a clarification, because there value for money, you see across the world different interpretations, and I think what Morteza was going for specifically was the analysis, the quantitative analysis, where you're comparing this private proposal to a public sector comparator and getting that level of analysis. But Patrick, I think there is some level of some sort of qualitative or subjective analysis, as Morteza was saying, that you can do at identification and screening. But as far as the more substantive quantitative analysis, that's maybe more acceptable to do during project development.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
Okay. And I think we have the next polling question up right now. In your opinion, what is the most critical item that adds value in the PPP delivery model? So if you just take a couple minutes to answer this question, and then we'll go ahead and react to the poll. And as you're answering this question, as Morteza had said, I think it's really important that, yes, you start doing the more substantive value for money analysis during project development, but you keep on revisiting that analysis all the way through the PPP process to ensure you are making the right decision before you go and go for tender. Correct.
When we are going through procurement stage and we are drafting tendering documents, that is really when we start allocating risks. And that risk allocation may change due to negotiations that we will have with our private partners. We usually put something together, we get feedback from them, we revise it. We go back and forth to find the sweet spot between where we believe it's appropriate to transfer risk and they believe it's appropriate for them to accept it and price it. Our approach is not to transfer all the risks, because we know that sometimes transferring the risks, it may cost you more than just managing that risk yourself. We just want to transfer those risks that private sector can control, and can control it and manage it cheaper than us. Otherwise, there is no point in transferring that risk.
Okay, it looks like the polling is closed for this question. So far, it's more of an even split among things. We have about 45% saying transfer certain risks to the private sector. We have about 45% saying integration between design, construction, finance, and or operating and maintenance. And then about 10% saying private sector finance.
Well, it's interesting because depending on where we are, which country we are in, I think the answers to that question may be slightly different. What I explained, the process I just explained, assumes that public sector has the option to publicly finance the project. I know that in some countries that may not be the case. So in some countries, maybe it's very important to have private sector on board to privately finance the project and get all the benefits that Patrick was talking about. You know, getting the project built, getting all the social benefits and other things. Some other cases, in more developed type of countries, when public sector has the option to publicly finance the project, but that comes at certain price. It can be opportunity cost of not having another project. It could be taking some level of risk, which they may not want to do it. So their answer might be a little bit different in more developed countries. But in general, I think one of the strong values that any P3 delivery model I have seen, it brings to the table, especially for projects that are a little bit complicated, projects that allow private sector to come in, bring their innovation, and as they go through the process of designing, building, operating, and maintaining the project, integrating all of those in-house, and allowing their designers to talk to their contractor and operation and maintenance people in order to find the best design that not only minimizes the cost today, but minimizes the cost over life of project. I think that's very important. And when you add financing to it, now you have designers talking to financial people. And I've seen sometimes in some projects that even private sector builds more. They add more to the scope of project. For example, they build a new bridge, they build a new ramp, which costs them more. But they know that if they build it in the future, they can make more money off of toll revenue, not only to pay for it, but also to offset some of the costs somewhere else. So that integration, I think brings a lot of value to projects. To me, personally, I think that is where I think most of the value lies.
Okay, as we move on to the next polling question, Patrick, did you have any reactions to add on to more Tessa?
This issue is a very important issue with relating to the assumptions that are used as inputs into the value for money analysis. And for that reason, we've begun some research, and Morteza is assisting us with that, to try and figure out what the drivers of value are in P3s, and what can you expect? Because right now, the state of the practice is, you have to make an assumption, and you don't really have any data and information on which to base your assumptions. So what we are hoping to do through this research is develop models that will help you identify how each of these characteristics, for example, integration of phases, innovation, management expertise of the private sector, how they impact the value you get. Of course, again, based on project characteristics and other factors, but trying to build those models and then collect data. So we are beginning another program to attempt to collect the data needed to run those models. So we have better estimates of the P3 efficiencies that you can get through a public-private partnership.
Thank you. We just closed the polling to the next question. So the question was, in your opinion, what is the most critical factor necessary for a successful PPP procurement? Transparency, competition, flexibility to incorporate innovative solutions, public sector capacity and experience, and proper allocation of risk and rewards. So there's a relatively even mix throughout all of them, except, interestingly enough, flexibility to incorporate innovative solutions, which you had just been talking about. So, Morteza, what's your reaction to this one?
Well, I'm a little bit surprised that flexibility to incorporate innovative solutions didn't get anyone's attention. But in general, there is no right or wrong answer. All of them are important, and depending on where we are, what type of project we are talking about, one of them may be a little bit more important than the other. Based on my experience, I think if you want to get the best price, competition, and proper allocation of risk and rewards, those are very important factors, because without competition, it's really, really hard to get the best value. If you're negotiating just with one company, let me tell you this, you're not in a good position. And especially if you know that you have to deliver the project. They know that you don't have an exit strategy. The deal you're going to get is not going to be a good deal. Proper allocation of risk and rewards is also very important because of what we just talked about, that sometimes, unfortunately, on public side, people think that in a P3 model, we should try to transfer as much risk as possible to private sector. Well, that is not true, because we should only transfer those risks to private sector that, one, they can manage it, they can control it. If it's something that they can't manage it, for example, whether dollar value tomorrow is going to go up or it's going to go down, well, they have no control over it. It's a gamble for them. And they have told us multiple times that if they can't manage a risk, they are not in a better position than us to price that risk. So it's very important to understand what risks can be transferred, how it should be transferred, and also come up sometimes with a risk-sharing mechanism that aligns the interests of both parties. I think that's also very important, because that helps a lot in the future in terms of not having conflicts with each other. When the interests of both sides are aligned in a risk-sharing environment, they will work together as partners to get the best result. And usually that's the best spot to be. So we try that a lot in our contracts to make sure that the interests are aligned and we are like partners, try to find win-win situations for both of us.
So this is a good segue into a question from Antonio. It was sort of how do you encourage more private bidder competition? How do you take into account private profitability, so that when you're in the early stages of project development, before you test the private waters a little bit more, how do you take into account those things so that you can encourage more competition when you are soliciting bids?
Well, there are a couple of things that we do. First of all, in our detail level project screening, that's when we start developing some numbers. Remember that I said you want to make sure that numbers add up. So we don't want to put a project out there that's financially unfeasible. We want to make sure that we understand that private sector cannot do magic. I mean, if numbers don't add up, they don't add up. You can't do anything about it. So that's when we would try to develop some sort of analysis to figure out how much approximately we need to put in the project to make it financially feasible, if any. And then when we go to project development phase, of course, there's more and more information that we gather, and we refine that number that we believe is needed, or the support that we think is needed from public agency to make project financially feasible. As we go through these steps, we usually share our thoughts, our results with private sector. We don't want to surprise them. So our high-level project screening report, detail-level project screening report are usually public documents. We put it on our website. We sometimes issue a request for information that basically invites private sector to come and talk to us, share their thoughts, their ideas with us. We meet with them on one-by-one basis, and we don't want to be surprised ourselves, and we don't want to surprise anyone. By doing that, having that open door policy and analyzing everything that we have, we try to develop a project that is financially feasible, and at the same time, we want to communicate to private sector that we understand the challenges, that we want to communicate those with you, we want to get your feedback, and to the extent possible, we want to work on a deal that works for you as well. Especially with that risk allocation I just mentioned earlier, it's very important to understand what private sector can can do and what they cannot do. Sometimes there are deal breakers for them because they need to go to their boards and persuade their boards to come and invest. So sometimes you have that open dialogue with them that, what do you need? Tell us what the deal breakers are. Let's sit down together and work through them and see if we can find a solution. So by having that dialogue with private sector, we usually are able to develop a deal that works for them and it works for us. And that way, we make sure that we have competition.
Okay. We had another polling question here. Do you believe unsolicited proposals deliver value? About 3/4 said yes. 1/4 said no. So maybe if we just have a quick reaction to this so we can try to make the best use of time and get to some questions afterwards.
I think in some cases, yes, they do deliver value, but in general, in Virginia, we allow unsolicited proposals because we do believe they deliver value. But even when we get an unsolicited proposal, we still want to go through competitive procurement. We have a process in place that tries to protect the person who has come up with an innovative idea, but we want to make sure that only innovative ideas are protected and not just somebody coming to us with a proposal trying to kill competition without really having any innovation. Now, that we don't consider that as unsolicited proposal, and we usually don't protect them for those type of ideas.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to try to get to some of your questions. Right before we get to that, Patrick, I know a lot of people have been interested in this webinar coming up specifically because of the dynamic of a federal system that the United States has. I've had a lot of questions on what is the role of the federal government in promoting PPPs. How do you see that in the U.S. system?
Well, Congress has actually, through legislation, asked us, the U.S. Department of Transportation, to encourage P3s. And there is a requirement that all major projects need to go through and consider P3s and do some kind of evaluation. So Congress has supported P3s, but the administration has also, at least for the past couple of years, initiated a program to encourage public-private partnerships. Now, the way the Congress has also sort of encouraged P3s is through this new bureau that has been set up. It was actually mandated by Congress. And the bureau is responsible for first providing low-cost financing, which goes to the P3 concessionaires. So it reduces the weighted average cost of capital and makes these projects more feasible. But also, the U.S. Department of Transportation provides funding to these projects. So this is some of the upfront funding that you saw, would be coming from the federal government. So in two ways, in the upfront funding as well as the financing, the federal government plays a role. Now, the federal government actually does not own any of the interstate highways. We do own facilities in national parks, but not on the system. It's the states that own those highways. So it's the states that are responsible for implementing, expanding, whatever, any project in their own states. So all we can do is encourage them and help them, but we don't do any P3s ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Building on this, we've talked a lot about transport. We talked a little bit before off the air about other types of P3 projects, and we did have another question from Antonio because we focused on transport. What are some other examples that maybe you've seen in your state or federally where P3 are starting to be involved in the U.S.?
Well, at local level, I have seen, for example, universities using P3s for some of their facilities, dormitories in particular. There are some P3 projects related to water or wastewater or energy. There are some P3 projects related to government buildings like courthouses. So there are different aspects of P3 deals that can be used by different agencies to deliver different types of projects. Those are the main ones that I have seen so far. But of course, we also have an IT sector that we have seen a couple of P3 deals in IT, in broadband, for example. And I know that a couple of the states recently have started looking at those type of projects that are not necessarily transportation, which is airport, port, roads, but they're more like either technology or what we call social infrastructure buildings.
So again, in the transportation area, airports, other than highways, airports, there are a couple of transit P3s, one here in Maryland and one in Colorado. There's a courthouse in Los Angeles that so these are generally major projects, unlike in Canada where the threshold for a P3 is much lower, something like $100 million. Our P3s tend to be much larger, as I think simply because of the amount of effort and cost to initiate and develop these contracts and financing, etc. So we may come down someday and make it more feasible for smaller projects, but right now it's only major projects.
And that brings up an important part of the topic of this webinar series is identification and screening. And it seems like maybe that financial threshold is something that both the federal government pushes a little bit, and then also you use in the Commonwealth of Virginia of a way of identifying a project and sort of screening at that first level before you even ask any questions about the project, just because of the amount of resources that it's going to take, and it just might not be economically viable at that point to examine smaller projects.
It is, yeah. And it can be different for each sector. For example, the threshold for a transportation project, road project, might be different than the threshold for a building.
Mm-hmm. Okay, some other questions here from Eliza. During contract execution management, what type of things do we need to be cautious about? What are the usual challenges during contract execution of PPP projects?
That's a very, very good question. So one of the problems is that the person who's in charge of contract administration doesn't know anything or doesn't have much background about the procurement phase and how the contract was developed, and a lot of background discussions behind some of the provisions in the contract. Sometimes, to be honest, they haven't even read the contract, because these are very large contracts, and it's hard for one person or even a couple of people to know every single thing in that contract. So I think it's very important to have people who are going to administer the contract as part of the procurement team. And that's what we usually do in Virginia. We bring them on board early on during procurement so that they are with us during procurement. They go to some of the meetings, they are aware of some of the conversations, they know the background behind some of the provisions that are in the contract. So that way, by the time that the contract is executed and ready for execution, they're up to the speed. And they know exactly what is in the contract, they know why it went to the contract, and how they should implement it. So that helps them a lot.
Okay, I think we can take probably about 2 more questions. So I'm going to ask one from Nuran Setsteg. How do you, when you're taking into account unsolicited proposals, what are the main challenges for screening and identifying unsolicited proposals, and how are the results and challenges of unsolicited proposals? Maybe you might see a little bit different for developing countries. I think it might be important to expand a little bit more, Morteza, on how Virginia identifies unsolicited proposals. I know that they have a buy-in from the private sector for the unsolicited proposal even to be considered, and that in itself sort of screens the not as good unsolicited proposal.
That's right. Well, the experience we had was that if you just open the door, people are just going to come in and submit proposals that some of them may even don't make sense. You're going to get thousands of proposals, and it's not even feasible to go through them, review them. It takes a lot of effort. So what we did was that we asked people who are submitting an unsolicited proposal to make a payment to us. So that way we are screening those proposals that are a little bit more serious than the ones that are just putting one page in front of us, asking us to look at something. So that's the first step. And then after we get the proposal, of course, like what I mentioned, we are looking for innovative ideas, competitive advantages that these teams may have compared to other teams. And we want to understand why we should accept this unsolicited proposal and why this particular team should be protected or given some credit over others in the market for coming up with that idea. If the idea is really innovative, if there are some merits in what this team is bringing to the table, we will accept it. We will protect them. We will not disclose it to others, but still we put it through a competitive procurement to allow others to come and bid. Of course, this team now has competitive advantage over other teams. But if that's not the case, if you just get an unsolicited proposal because one team wants to kill competition, it's a project that anybody else could come up with, there's no innovation, nothing in particular in it, we usually reject it.
Of course, one important consideration in transportation is these have to be on the long-range transportation plan. So they would need to choose a project that's already on the transportation plan if they want to be considered. If not, then they have to go through the process of actually putting the project on the long-range transportation plan, because otherwise, they can't move forward.
Oh, that's great. And one final question to wrap up before closing remarks is something that I feel is a very important lesson learned is the amount of communication that goes back and forth. And Patrick, I know you could probably talk about this of what the federal level recommends. And Morteza, I know from reviewing a lot of the Virginia documents, all of the stakeholders are involved or informed at every step of the process, and that sort of takes away some of the political instability that may arise and cause havoc for a project going forward. So if you both could talk about just that disclosure.
I guess, Congress has asked for transparency, and that's in the law, so it's something we encourage. And I think in the United States, all states are quite upfront, putting all of the information on their websites relating to the project, getting stakeholders involved. I know that Virginia has specific process to make sure all the local jurisdictions are involved every step of the way, and that way they're able to get support for the project.
Yes, and we have certain steps that we need to take by law, but we usually take more steps because we know the value of transparency. We know the value of stakeholder engagement. And in particular, I want to emphasize engagement because we don't want to just put something out there on the website and say that, well, we disclose this information. That's not what we do. What we try to do is that we want to engage our stakeholders in the process. For example, for 66 project, early on, we created a stakeholder advisory committee, which consisted from people from federal agencies, from localities, from towns, people who were impacted by the project. We wanted them to be part of the process. We wanted them to hear what we have to say, hear the challenges, be part of the decision-making process. And that helped a lot because they were giving us a lot of good feedback that then we could go back and use to better refine our project. And as we went through the process, now everybody has the information about the process. There are no surprises. If somebody doesn't like a particular aspect of the project, we discuss with them. Everybody understands that they're not going to get 100% of what they want to get. It's give and take. At the end of the day, you can't make everybody happy, but at least they feel part of the project. They feel engaged. We have guidelines on our website that talks about the steps that we go through. That creation of that advisory committee, stakeholder advisory committee, was very successful. And it resulted from being in a situation in 2011, 2012 that people were opposing our project to the point that when we signed the contract, pretty much everybody knew what was done, no surprises, everybody was on board. So a lot of that risk, stakeholder opposition, political opposition, was off the table by the time that we got to the end of the procurement. So in our case, it was very important, very transparent process. You can go on project website, all the documents are there, and even private sector liked that a lot because the job that they have now moving forward is much easier, knowing that everybody is up to the speed, everybody has been part of the process, and there are no surprises, nothing to hide.
Thank you, Patrick. If you just wanted to say a few did you have any closing remarks or anything?
We've got a wealth of information on our website, so I encourage you to go there and look it up.
And Morteza, any final comments?
Same thing. I'll be happy to answer any questions that people may have. My contact information is on the presentation. We love to exchange ideas, experiences. So I'm glad that Rob, you have put this webinar together. These type of interactions are very helpful for us, at least, to also understand from the rest of the world on where they are.
Well, thank you very much to both of you for coming here for another successful webinar. I hope the audience has really enjoyed this. Again, if you go, you'll be asked to have some questions on how the flow of this webinar went and things to that with the link at the end of this. Again, I just want to say thank you very much. Great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but as both Morteza and Patrick have said, they are available if you have any questions. They're willing to have a dialogue and expand the information and the knowledge on PPP even more. So thank you very much again. Have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, and good night. Thank you.